Okay, we are live. And thanks for coming in, Arno. And we're going to talk about the Gandharva type deity today. And this will connect back to most prominently Hermes, as we can see on the chart. Um, there is at the basis of Hermes, at the basis of the scholarly investigation of Hermes, comparative mythology, identifications of Hermes, there is this issue of this confusion of him and the Pan type, which I think if you just go on Wikipedia, you will see it repeatedly. Many people that you will talk to will bring it up as if it is, a sort of consensus or well-established scholarly position that Pan and Hermes just split from an original single god, and that they are at the Proto-Indo-European level, that they came from one god, that they are just two parts of one god, basically. Um, but this hasn't been really established thoroughly enough. That theory is just it it makes some sense, I think, when you look at some of the data, but it just hasn't exhausted all the possibilities of who Hermes could be as his own individual deity. The possibility that they actually were unique deities unto themselves has to be more thoroughly tried, and I think that is what the article Hermes and Gandharvas by Roger Woodard and Nick J. Allen did and does. And so I recommend this article. It is available online on the website of Mythology Comparative. And if you just Google Hermes and Gandharvas, Nick Allen, it should come up, or just include Nouvelle Mythologie Comparée, and you should be able to find this article online. And basically, what they do is show that Hermes has many more very specific motifs in common with the deity type of the Gandharvas in Vedic, from the Vedic corpus. So if you can then establish that Hermes has these more specific comparisons with the Gandharva type, and his overlaps with Pan are much more generic and broad, this kind of just shows you what's happening. It gives you a picture of what's really happening, which is that, yes, Hermes and Pan have these sort of broad, generic categories where they have similarities, but those are not specific enough. It really just tells you that they are similar deity types, but Hermes is more specifically connected to this Gandharva type. So I'm going to just read the summary of that article that I have in my book chapter on this. The book chapter is called Agma, Hermes, and Gandharva. And here is the summary of that article so that we can get an idea of what the Gandharva vis-a-vis Hermes looks like. Okay, so this is from my book chapter. So, quote, some of this article's points. A chief representative among the Gandharvas, named Narada, is known to have first brought the lyre, a strung tortoise shell, to humanity, as Hermes also is said to have invented the lyre by stringing a tortoise shell. So this is an extremely specific, inventing the lyre via stringing a tortoise shell that they both have, the Gandharva and Hermes. Very uncanny. Gandharvas are the chief embodiments of the musical power, court singers and musical teachers of the gods. And Gandharva means music, as Allen and Woodard put it. Also, as an aside, if you look at the etymology of Gandharva on Wiktionary, The first meaning is just that it is this mythical being called the Gandharvas. But the second meaning is that it is a singer or court bard. So essentially, to say someone is a Gandharva, it just means they are the bard of the court of the gods, essentially. So the meaning of the word, the name Gandharva, is directly connected to this role of being some sort of bard slash singer. And then as Hermes also teaches even the master musician Apollo the lyre. So Hermes is shown to play the lyre, I think, in the Homeric hymn, and he is the one who, teaches even Apollo the lyre. Apollo then being, in some contexts, he seems the more famously musical god Apollo, but really it is Hermes who teaches him the lyre. So very strong connection to the lyre. Gandharvas are known for their eloquence and often narrate myths, as Hermes also is specifically a god of eloquence who narrates myths. And again, I think this is especially in the Homeric hymn to Hermes, but it's one of something like that. Hermes retells important sections of the mythology. The Gandharvas are often divine messengers and go-betweens, as of course is Hermes, and that's kind of his most famous role, is this messenger and go-between. But that's exactly what the Gandharvas are. They are associated also with raw sexuality. While the boundary marker statues of Hermes, known as the Hermai, were known for their prominent phalluses. So sexual imagery is associated with Hermes in that context, so that could be an overlap as well. They have the power of flight or even wings, the Gandharvas do, or they fly around on birds, or even there are some stories where a Gandharva has some sort of airplane contraption that is described that he's flying on. Anyways, the power of flight. And then as Hermes has, of course, winged sandals and has to fly about to do his job of messenger and other things. And then a god who is distinct from, but typologically close and linked to the Gandharvas, that is Kubera. And this is one of the arguments Allen and Woodard make. They say there's this god Kubera, the god of wealth, who is typologically linked and close to the Gandharvas. He has a staff or wand with the power of inducing sleep, as Hermes has the magical rod, the rhabdos or caduceus, with the same power of inducing sleep. So that sleep-inducing rod of Hermes is another very uncanny, unique kind of implement, and that belongs to Kubera, the god of wealth in the Vedic material. That god is closely connected to the Gandharvas, but he is not one. But you can see how it is this sort of possible overlapping categories there.
I'm going to put a pin in that sleep inducing for some points later.
Okay, good. And so these are perhaps the most crucial among a host of other connections and similarities described by Allen and Woodard. So there's a lot more. Yeah, there's a lot more we can go into. That just kind of paints the basic picture. They are a class of beings for the Vedic material, but there are also specific ones that are named, that are kind of the most prominent ones, and so they have more full myths attributed to these individual Gandharvas. And so if you take those kind of more prominent ones, you can find more and more smaller and larger connections to Hermes. So what else is there to say? One point I wanted to bring up was, this is something I will ask Josephus again when he comes back, but in Mitravaruna, Georges Dumézil brings up a connection of the Gandharvas to Varuna, and then also to a parallel with the Luperci. How do you pronounce that? Luperci. The
That's
Roman
how I pronounce it.
Luperci or whatever. The Roman. Yeah, and so that is those. The Luperci are also connected to some of the Mannerbund activities, wolf related, and all of that sort of thing. So there is this question that I'll want to raise to Josephus about the possible overlap of the Gandharvas. They're this kind of class of beings um, flying around in liminal spaces, doing the things that I described connected to music and speech, power of speech, being poets, myth tellers. Uh, yeah, James Field says the Luperci equal to the Gandharva. That is kind of what Dumasil draws a connection, and so I'm raising that as a question: are the Luperci, do they equal the Gandharva? That's what I would like to investigate further, because I'm not 100% positive if that holds up or not. But if it does, it suggests an overlap of, and I'm getting some echo on your thing, unfortunately. But it suggests some overlap of the Gandharvas as a class with the Rudra types, the Rudra warband as a class. So there might be overlap to think about with these groups of kind of liminal poet, um, poets kind of flying around and that sort of thing. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I had a screenshot of some old messages when we were discussing this a long time ago. There's one from Joseph where he mentions this overlap. We can obviously still ask him again, but if you wanted me to read it,
Oh yeah, sure.
he says the Gandharvas form a sort of Mannerbund, and we tend to see the various mythological Mannerbunda associated sometimes to the point of amalgamation, like the Rudras and the Maruts. As Apollon and Dionysus are sometimes understood as solar and lunar versions of the same, so the Rudras and Gandharvas could be solar and lunar versions of the archetypal Mannerbund. Is essentially where
Yeah.
he goes with that.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, you can read more about Dumasil's exact arguments with that as well. But one thing this will bring us back to is the question of Bragi in the Norse mythology. So Bragi, there isn't that much mythology about Bragi. There's him and Idun, and they are paired together. And of course, Bragi is there at Aegir's feast and is kind of blustering and threatening Loki and kind of a sort of doorkeeper there. So suggesting a warrior side to this god type possibly that shows up. But the point is, all that we really know about Bragi at the end of the day is kind of his role as the bard, as the bard god, the god of kind of individualized bard role. And but what's interesting is Odin, as you pointed out to me, actually, Arno, I didn't realize this, but Odin is called Bragi. It's listed as one of his, or it is at least, it's seemingly equated with him in one of the texts. Like, I don't remember if it was Hrafnagald or Odin's or something like that, or what one of these, like not one of the main texts. But yeah, do you recall where Odin is called Bragi? So, because this is interesting because Odin is the Rudra, and Bragi is connected to him as, I think, his son, or it's at least kind of implied that he's his son. I can't remember exactly. And then Odin also gets the name of Bragi himself, so that he is Bragi as an epithet, and that kind of just means he's a bard, but it is this name like directly connecting them. Do you remember by any chance where Odin gets called Bragi?
It's from an Icelandic poem called Hofudhausen.
Okay.
It's part of. I think it's part of Egil's saga. I'm not entirely sure. I
Right.
don't know the context around where he's called that, but the name Bragi means doesn't have like a perfect English translation, but it's been translated as chief, poet, like foremost, or best. So
Right. Interesting.
I think Bragi, Odin's called Bragi. He has a son named Bragi. I think his son Bragi is called that in terms of him being the best skald,
Hmm.
the best of poets. He does actually have um, a psychopompous role in stanza 14 of Hokonamal.
Hmm.
He and Hermother receive um, they receive Håkon the Good in Valhalla. Um, both of them, Bragi and Hermother, kind of act as like a psychopomp, um,
Yes.
leading him to the afterlife. So he's not only a skald, but yeah, in terms of
Yeah.
that name, it probably just has to relate to its literal translation with it meaning like chief, foremost, best,
That's
which would
interesting.
apply to Odin in a different but maybe similar way than it would his son Bragi.
Right. Yeah. And so on that point, uh, Bragi and Hermother potentially they could see Gandharvas in the Vedic material are a whole class of beings. They seem to have been kind of narrowed to one main Gandharva in the case of Hermes, like he's summing up the Gandharvas in a way. But it leaves open this possibility that there could be more than one in other branches too. There could be more than one figure who aligns with the Gandharvas in the Norse, in the Celtic, or even in the Greek. So it's possible that both Bragi and Hermother, it's always been interesting. We've talked about this before, how they could, because they're paired together in this psychopompic uh, myth, where they have this similar role to a psychopompic Hermes role. And Hermother has this name that looks strangely similar to Hermes. So we've thought about that. I will say that Bragi's marriage to Idun. I've shown that this is a probable parallel to the Gandharvic role of the Gandharva's marriage in Vedic material, and that's a more complicated argument. But the point is, Bragi is the kind of main bard of the gods, and he has this marriage to Idun, and then he also has this psychopompic role in at least one important myth. And so there's a real clear case for Bragi, I think, as the Gandharva slash Hermes. And then Hermother is a possible other one because there can be more than one and they're kind of paired together. So it's kind of hard to tell if that's what if Hermother has a different role there or if he does have just another aspect of the Gandharvic role is entirely possible. And I did just want to say that I found it interesting that Arya Akasha just came out with an article a couple weeks ago saying that he was saying exactly this, which we've talked about before, and of course it's in my book that this is my stance. But he was saying, guys, Odin is not directly the Hermes type, basically. And he said specifically, he said Bragi and Hermother are the Hermes type. So that's his position as well. So, anyways, I always like when we
Further
have.
proof, sorry to interrupt.
I always like when we have more
Yeah,
voices supporting that. Like people really need to look at this. This isn't just throwing things at the wall. There is this important, well-defined role of the bard, the court bard of the gods. He's not like the highest god of all. He's um, there's a certain sense that he's a little bit subordinated because he's this focused role of the bard, and in that role he has a psychopompic and a messenger role, among other things. Yeah, what were we going to say?
yeah. Sorry to interrupt you there, but in either Gylfaginning or Skaldskaparmal, Bragi is also said to have runes carved on his tongue, which I think is a pretty interesting detail that would connect him to Oma, the Irish Gandharva parallel, where he,
Yeah.
or Ogmios as well, where he's depicted with chains or fetters tied to people directly to his tongue, who is also the writing system of those peoples who worshipped him is named after him. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so there is a psychopompous role and that mention of him having runes carved on his tongue beyond just being an eloquent bard. That, despite there not being explicit mythic narratives that we can use to identify him as a Gandharva parallel, I think are plenty good enough for us to see.
Absolutely, yeah. So runes carved on his tongue. Um, the there is a famous image of um, Ogmios, or the description of Ogmios, who is enchaining people with his tongue. Essentially, the power of his eloquence is so strong. So yeah, it is this consistent picture, I think, that we're starting to get, even though if you look at Bragi and Hermes on the face of it, um, it doesn't scream out to you that they're the same. But I think you have to dig to this deeper level um, of specific motifs, and it does kind of start to come together. So let's see. I have some other material I wanted to bring up. So just one moment here. Okay, so the Gandharva does appear in the Rig Veda a few times, um, and one of the most interesting places is in the Surya's Bridal Hymn, which I go into a lot in my book, and it's this very complex mytheme of the marriage of Surya, the female sun, essentially, sometimes described as the daughter of the sun, Surya, the male sun. So you have male Surya and female Surya, and there is the marriage of this sun princess Surya, but she marries at least three people, three deities rather, and three main ones, but also there are like a couple of others who are also potentially wed an aspect of her or are suitors of her at the same time in this hymn. So it's this very it's a very loaded hymn. A lot is happening compacted in this one hymn. So let's see if I can bring it up here. One second. All right, so zoom this. All right, so the beginning of the hymn talks about Surya, the heavens being sustained. So, and then the lovely was Surya's robe. She came to that which Gatha had adorned. Thought was the pillow of her couch. Okay, let's see. The bridesmen were the Ashvin pair. Agni was leader of the train. Soma was he who wooed the maid. The groomsmen were both Ashvins. When the sun god Savitar bestowed his willing Surya on her lord. Her spirit was the bridal car, the covering thereof was heaven. Bright were both steers that drew it when Surya approached her husband's home. Thy steers were steady, kept in place by holy verse and Samahim. Okay, bridal pomp. So this is the marriage of Soma, that is the sacred liquid god who is identified with the moon, to this sun princess. So it's lunar solar marriage, the marriage of the moon and the sun. But also the Ashvins are present, as groomsmen. But it says here in verse 14, when on your three-wheeled chariot, O Ashvins, ye came as wooers unto Surya's bridal. Then all the gods agreed to your proposal, Pushan, as son elected you as fathers. Okay, so the Ashvins are somehow wooers here, and it's unclear even to scholars. A lot of scholars think this is part of the custom of sending wooers for the potential groom, so that the Ashvins are just go-betweens here. But if we look at the Ashvins' other mythology, they end up marrying what seem to be forms of the sun princess themselves. So that's also curious. And then Pushan, who was just mentioned, also is said to marry Surya, who is his sister, the female sun. So those two are also somehow brides of this Surya, even though they're involved in different roles here in this marriage, where Soma is the main groom. And then let's see, I'm trying to find the most important part here. Okay, so finally, all of this information is told to us about Surya finally coming to marry Soma as the main husband. But then it says, verse 40, Soma obtained her first of all. Next, the Gandharva was her lord. Agni, and that's a typo, but Agni was thy third husband. Now one born of woman is thy fourth. And that means this was the template for the marriage ceremony in Vedic society, which is explained more fully in the Griya Sutras, which are domestic rite manuals, sutras, describing things like how the actual marriage ceremony was done. And it involves an enactment of this triple marriage, first to Soma, then to the Gandharva, and then to Agni. And in that marriage to Agni, they circle the fire. The prospective bride and groom circle the fire together, and that sort of thing. And then it says, "Now one born of woman is thy fourth husband," and that means the human who is engaging in marriage here, he is the one who is that fourth husband here, that's being referenced. And that means that Surya, the female sun goddess, stands for the human bride, or the human bride is embodying Surya when she gets married in the marriage ritual, marrying these, being wedded ritually to these three gods in turn, and then finally fourth to her human husband. But then it reiterates this: Soma to the Gandharva, and to Agni the Gandharva gave, and Agni hath bestowed on me riches and sons, and this my spouse. Okay, so very complicated stuff. I go into this a lot in my book because my theory was that each of these marriages that the Norse Horse twin, we believe that's probably Freyr. So, but that's an aside. So my idea was that there are myths outside of the Rig Veda telling of marriages to different what seem to be the sun goddess under different names. And so there may be one that is the Soma god under the name Chavana. I believe Chavana is this legendary form of the Soma god. And then he marries Sukanya, who seems to be a stand-in for Surya, the sun princess. And that there may be another story where a sun princess marries the Gandharva, and another story where the sun princess marries Agni, or marries Agni himself. And then yet another story where the sun princess marries the Ashvins, and then another where the sun princess marries Pushan. These are all the names that we just went through. So the point is, this role of marrying the sun princess, even though it's complicated and there are multiple grooms, it is a key part of who the Gandharva is. And one of the reasons it's important is because in the Griya Sutras, it describes what is done in the section of the marriage ceremony where the bride is being ritually wedded to the Gandharva. And what happens is the Gandharva is represented as a staff called a Gandharva summit. And this staff is placed in, okay, let me just, let me get the exact quotation here, but okay. This is in the Griya Sutra of Apastamba. And it says, upon coming home from their wedding to their home for the first time, the married couple are expected to observe a period of chastity, during which they are to place a staff between them while they sleep. As Narayan Iyengar explains, this staff is called a Gandharva summit and is believed to have within it the spirit of the Gandharva Visvavasu, the very same chief Gandharva that has other important roles connected to some of the Hermes material. And this Visvavasu is the one specifically named in the Surya's bridal Rigvedic hymn. So this period of chastity, where the Gandharva summit is in the bed with the married couple, can last anywhere from 3 nights to a maximum of a full year. So along with this, a scholar named Grossman, I think Jan Grossman, says that the Gandharva is known as the guardian of virginity. And yeah, so that is kind of the key ritual role of the Gandharva in the marriage ceremonies. He is one within this sequence of divine husbands, and in that role, he is somehow guarding the virginity of the bride. But it's kind of this double meaning because he has this sexual potency as well that he's connected to. So he is in a way a threat to the virginity, but also guarding it. And that is kind of a common mythic concept of this duality of the threat and the guardianship of something. So that tells you something about the Gandharva, but also we see this. I think we see this concept of the Gandharva as guardian of the virginity, and specifically connected to a special staff in Hermes and in the Celtic parallel of Puis. So this is a complex issue, so I apologize if that's a bit confusing, but it's kind of too important to pass over if we're trying to describe who the Gandharva is, because this is a crucial piece. So along with everything else we discussed about Hermes and the Gandharva, we also have the wooing of Persephone as an important Greek myth, essentially. And even you have multiple deities trying to woo or to potentially marry Persephone, which reminds us already of the Surya's bridal with the multiple husbands, all connected to that. And this is also a complex issue because I don't think it's as simple as saying Persephone is one-to-one with Surya. But nonetheless, you have this similar mytheme. And what does Hermes do? Is he is a prospective suitor, and he gives the gift of his staff as his bridal gift or wooing gift to place, and it is specifically said that she is to place this in her chamber, and it will adorn her chamber of Persephone. So again, you have um, the Gandharva summit in the Vedic material. It's the staff that is the embodiment of the Gandharva's presence. It goes in the bed of the bride and groom for a certain ritual period, protecting virginity. Then you have Hermes himself is the one who gives the staff to Persephone to adorn her bedchamber in this wooing role of Persephone, who he ultimately is not the one who marries her, but you can see with this sequence of wooers around Persephone a similar kind of motif developing. Now, even more, perhaps even more kind of a clear parallel is the Celtic Pwyll. So it's Pwyll, and this is in the first branch of the Mabinogi. And what we have is a story of Pwyll encountering Araun and going to the other world, Annuin, and Araun is the lord of basically the underworld or otherworld of Annuin, and this will be there are so many interlocking steps and levels that kind of have to be shown and demonstrated to get the point across. But essentially, I will show if we go into a Soma stream, that Araun is the Soma type god, much like Mither. But the Soma type god can be the lord of the underworld as well, because the lord of the moon is connected to the underworld, and he can be one of the lords of the underworld. But of course, Soma is the god who was the main husband of Surya in the Rigvedic hymn that we just were looking at. So Soma is the first husband of Surya, as it says. So you have Pwyll encountering Araun, who I'm saying is Soma here, and Araun is already married to some beautiful goddess of the other world who doesn't receive a name. He doesn't. Yeah, Marcus. Yes, he doesn't sleep with exactly. So this is what I was going to go into. So precisely. So what happens is Araun's wife doesn't have a name, but I'm saying she is actually the parallel of this Surya, because Pwyll has to, as a sort of recompense for his hounds eating Araun's kill, he has to agree to make a trade with Araun and take his place for a year and fight Halfgan on his behalf and that sort of thing. But while Pwyll is taking the place, he's exchanged kingdoms essentially with Araun. While he is in Araun's place, I believe, and someone can correct me if I'm misremembering this, but I believe he appears as Araun. He essentially has the semblance of Araun. And what he has to do along with this is sleep in the bed of Araun's wife, Araun's unnamed wife. But what he does is each night she kind of, is there in bed in a suggestive way, but Pwyll turns away from her and kind of holds his ground for a year. Havgan. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's yes. He resembles Araun physically, exactly. So I'll just read so I can get the exact point across correctly. I'm going to read my summary of this. So this is in, of course, the first branch of the Mabinogi, Pwyll, Prince of David, which This comes before Puich encounters Rhiannon. He says that the only recompense Aran will take is for Puich to exchange places with him and become lord of Aran's underworld kingdom for a year and a day, and he must fight and slay Havgan at the end of the term. During this time, Puich will have the semblance of Aran and will sleep in bed next to Aran's wife. During the whole year and a day, Puich does not make love to the wife of Aran. We read that every night, quote, the moment they got into bed, he turned his face to the side, with his back toward her. From then until the next day, he did not say a single word to her. So, my argument in the book, in a complex set of other pieces, is that Puich is this Gandharva. And again, the staff that goes in the bed of the married couple embodies and represents the Gandharva being in the bed between them, preserving virginity for, it says, up to a year as the maximum term that occurs for in Vedic marriage rituals. And in the Rig Vedic hymn, the sequence of husbands is Soma, married to Surya, then Gandharva comes next, then Agni, of course. So if you have Aran as Soma and his bride as the Surya, the solar bride, then Puich lays in bed with her and preserves the virginity of her and themselves for exactly a year and a day. So he is essentially embodying this role we see with the Gandharva summit very precisely. And it's also the exact sequence. If you have Aran as Soma, it goes Soma to the Gandharva as this Puich, essentially being this ritual husband of Aran's wife, but in a virginity preserving way for exactly a year. So it seems to be that Puich is this Gandharva in that sense. And then, as I described before, there can be multiple different stories of marrying the Sun Princess by these different types that they can break apart into multiple tales. So I think that the story with Rhiannon has elements of the Surya marriage as well, but there's more complications with that I won't get into right now. Okay, so you have that's the argument for Puich, essentially. Is there anything that I'm leaving unclear in that, Arno, or any questions you have on how that?
No, yeah. So it's an incredibly difficult concept to simply explain. I think you did a pretty good job. I think the Welsh version of this solar bridal procession is probably the clearest European example, since Rhiannon is the bride all the way through. And I'm kind of wondering if this is a transition from the House of Night to the House of Day, not to be purely naturalistic. But something else about the Gandharvas is that they dwell within the mansion of Varuna, the nocturnal god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is all. I think this is all at night. The Puich stuff, the cosmic night, so to speak, because the Pryderi conflict with Gwydion that happens later after. At the very end of in the fourth branch, at the beginning of the fourth branch, and that is after Puich has even died in battle, and so it is much later. So I think this is all, quote unquote, in the cosmic night. Like you were saying, Gandharvas are in the mansion of Varuna, which is night. So that would make sense.
I'm also curious if this that fourth husband you were talking about, who's also the sun, if that would be the Ashvins, since they also marry another. I believe it's Savitri.
Yes. So the fourth one specifically is just referring to the human husband, so none of the gods. But and because the Ashvins are in the hymn in a different capacity already described, where they had gone as wooers, and they are not human either. They are not born of man or whatever. It says the fourth one is born of man or something like that. So yeah, that's just, they're in different roles. There's just so many husbands that it gets very confusing. But there are other things that point to this Puich alignment, which are let me think here. I had a thought and I forgot it, but I compare Puich speculatively. This is one of the more speculative comparisons that I make in the whole book, but I compare Puich to a figure called Samvarana, a legendary figure in the Vedic material. He's in either the Brahmanas or the Mahabharata. And Samvarana, he sees a divine beauty, a woman when he's out hunting, I believe, and she kind of disappears as he tries to approach her and reappears, and he's trying to find her, and finally he does find her. Uh, she reappears and then is like, let's get married. It's very similar to Puich and Rhiannon, okay? Because Puich sees Rhiannon far off and he can't catch up to her until she finally lets him catch up and then is like, we should get married. It's very similar, very simple, a simple motif that could appear in different stories and not be connected. But the interesting thing is that there's also a wasteland that is created when Samvarana and this female who ends up being Savitri, another name of Surya, because she is just the sun princess, daughter of Vivasvat, who is Vivasvat, aka Surya. He's the sun god. Anyways, so this Samvarana and actually it's Tapati. It's Tapati is the name of the female in the Samvarana story, but she is essentially seems to be a name of Savitri or Surya, because she is the daughter. She is the solar daughter of Vivasvat, and I think they just kind of can appear. These sun princesses can appear with different names. But anyways, there's this wasteland occurs that there are echoes of in later branches of the Mabinogion, connected to, Pryderi and other figures, which could be connected to Puich. So that's why I say it's kind of a speculative parallel, but there are some connections to be looked at. The figure Samvarana and Tapati get married in what is called the Gandharva marriage. It's a type of marriage that was like a love marriage. So there are different categories of marriage for Vedic society. And so that was another interesting point, is that Samvarana, he's like this king or king to be. And I don't think he's called a Gandharva himself. He's just a legendary figure, but he could be a stand-in for a Gandharvic figure, is what I'm suggesting here, because of some of these parallels. So yeah, what else was there? Maybe it's just the way that Rhiannon, then the spouse of Puich, Rhiannon in some ways parallels, for example, like Idun, the spouse of Bragi. So you can make these kind of zoom out and kind of see the different pairings, and it'll start to tell you some things. But I didn't want to get too lost in those weeds. I go into excessive weeds on this specific topic in my book. So if you want to go really far into the weeds, please have a look. Yeah, what else? Was there any other? I feel like I should move on to the next point if possible.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, great. Okay, so any questions that anyone has about, anyone in the chat have any questions that I can clarify? Important part about Puich is that he is a model of good kingship. His sovereignty is validated by his marriage to a horse goddess and his behavior throughout. Yes, that's very true. Yeah. It's too bad Josephus has not joined. I was gonna ask him some Good questions. But the other thing to point to, so I wanted to build on this possible connection of the Luperci to the Rudras, because we have, for example, Visvavasu is sort of this most famous Gandharva name. He's the one who appears in the Rigvedic hymn that we just touched on, Visvavasu. Visvavasu also has wooing tales that remind of Puich and these sort of themes as well. He sees a beautiful maiden while he's flying in his airplane and has to go have this. I touch on some similarities to how Puich has to do this badger in the bag motif to win Rhiannon back after he loses her, that are similar to that Visvavasu wooing myth. But then there is also in the Rig Veda another prominent Gandharva who's called Krishanu. And Krishanu is mentioned as the one who essentially guards the Soma. And this is the other thing I was forgetting, is that Puich essentially becomes Aran, right? Like we just discussed. He takes over the lord of Anun, the lordship of Anun, and takes on the semblance even of Aran himself. But again, I can't wait till we do a Soma stream. I'll fully explain why Aran is Soma. But this is a big part of it. Just the fact that Aran is in this role suggests already that he may be Soma, and so that has to be explored. And what other parallels of Aran to Mither in particular, and Mither much more clearly is Soma. But in any case, of course, Aran, it is his cauldron that is stolen by King Arthur in the siege of Annuin poem that's famous. I can't pronounce the name, but it's like Predu Anun, and so he's the keeper of a famous cauldron. This is a sort of Soma role that Mither also has. Mither has his cauldrons and cows stolen. Mither has a mythos much more clearly that we can later connect to the Soma theme and this specific Surya's bridal hymn that you have to keep going back to. But in any case, Puich essentially becomes a double of Aran in this story. And at the end of their story, after Puich kills Havgan, in thanks to him for fulfilling the terms of their bargain, Aran agrees to share the lordship of Annuin with Puich. So Puich becomes co-lord of Annuin, essentially. They actually share both of they just become like co-lords of both of their kingdoms. So it's very interesting. And what we have in the Vedic material is that the Gandharva is the guardian of the Soma, and he is like a protege of Soma. It seems to I don't have the exact quotation, but he's described as like a protege, a double of Soma. And even the Soma, when it is poured into the waters in the Rig Veda, is then called the Gandharva of the waters. So Soma being poured in the waters called the Gandharva of the waters. Like the Soma becomes the Gandharva when it enters the waters in this complex esoteric way. So this seems to be another thing supporting this idea that Puich and Aran are this Gandharva, the preserver of virginity, and Soma, this lord of the underworld, who they become one sort of the protege of the other, one sort of the guardian of the other's realm, and they're sort of overlapping, have an overlapping domain. So anyways, this Krishanu in the Rig Veda, he's the guardian of the Soma, specifically when Shaina the hawk or Indra and Shaina, there's different tellings of how the Soma is stolen back from the mountain. It's either Shaina or Indra and Shaina, I think. And when they steal back the Soma, or steal the Soma from the mountain, Krishanu shoots an arrow at them to try to stop them, but misses. So what Stella Cromrish does with this in her Presence of Shiva is she points out how this is a direct echo of exactly what we saw Rudra doing on a sort of higher level. Rudra is the defender of the integrity of the liquid of the absolute, sort of the plenum of sacred liquid, which is the unbroken pre-cosmic state. Rudra guards that and doesn't want it to be lost into the cycle of generation and that sort of thing. Doesn't want that integrity to be broken or diminished in any way. And in order to try to stop that from happening, Rudra fires his arrow at Prajapati when Prajapati goes to spill his seed in his daughter. And Rudra misses. Rudra is too late firing, so to speak. Mythically speaking, he fires his arrow too late, and the sacred liquid is lost into the world, and the creation of the world begins. The Soma, when it is stolen, is sort of a lower echo of that pre-cosmic sacred liquid and its loss into the world. So there are these sort of fractally echoing layers of myth, but Krishanu essentially is like an echo of that primordial Rudra. He's even an archer. He fires his arrow, but fires it too late to stop the theft of the Soma from the mountain, even though that theft is by who we would see as good gods, Indra and Agni. Nonetheless, he's trying to stop this outflow of sacred liquid, or stop this loss of sacred liquid from, again, the mountain is again another symbol of the enclosing power that also Rudra had, and it's sort of within the world it becomes objectified as this obstruction, as an obstruction to the outflowing of that sacred liquid. In that sense, Cromrish essentially is arguing that Krishanu, the Gandharva, is like a lower echo of the higher Rudra. And so this would support this concept that there could be an overlap of the Rudras, the Mannerbund Rudras, and this sort of Mannerbund of Gandharvas or Luperci, this overlap with the Luperci. So you can then also kind of map that onto Bragi versus Odin. If Odin also is called Bragi, then the bard Bragi is like a lower emanation of that bardic role. All these things are can kind of theoretically make sense if you see one of the Gandharva's roles as this preserver of the sacred liquid, the Soma, on this lower level in a way that directly echoes the Rudra. So they are different god types, the Rudra and the Gandharva, but they, once again, kind of like Rudra and the Pushan, there's all these different ways these different gods kind of have an echo of a Rudra role in them. So does that make sense? Isn't Krishanu also the Sanskrit word for Dr. Bush in Indian folk medicine? This is probably relevant considering that the central sacrament here appears to be some sort of entheogenic rite. That's very interesting. I didn't know that about the Dr. Bush in Indian folk medicine. I don't really know anything about folk medicine, but that would make sense, and that's fascinating. So obviously the Gandharva in general is a good deity, but this is a very ambivalent role of trying to shoot an arrow at Indra and Agni while they're stealing the Soma, and that Soma is sometimes described as having been stolen by demons even. So the Gandharva is in this ambivalent role. Are they siding with the demons in that or not? But you do point to an interesting point there about the entheogenic rite. So I have another quote. Do you have anything to touch on that, Arno? I'm going to pull up one more thing. I just have all these quotes I want to read from, but if you have any
Not
thoughts.
so far.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, so Cromrish describes the Gandharva's role in this as he guards the Soma, of course, right? But that is also, like Porphyrion mentioned, this is sort of an esoteric role. He is the god of the bards, remember, and the Soma is the substance that is the fuel of the bard. It is the meat of poetry. And so really, as the guardian, he is also he's an obstacle, but really he is also its conveyor. It's this double role of sort of blocking it, but yes, I mean that there's that side to it. That's, I'm not going to deny that or anything. But anyways, so the Soma is a real thing, and it connects to all this stuff, but it's also esoterically, it is the inspiration, is the liquid of inspiration. Cromrish says the Gandharva precedes creation. He is the creative Soma inspiration within the seer in sacred secrecy. When Soma himself is about to speak from within the seer, so again, this is mapping this esoterically to within the seer himself. When the seer makes surge the wave from the ocean, see Rigveda 10.123.2, of his heart, and on its crest, Soma, the Gandharva, is born. So right there, she's equating Soma with the Gandharva because she cites Rigveda 9.86.36. That hymn is a hymn to Soma specifically, Rigveda 9.86. It's in the Soma Pavamana, and in it directly calls on the Gandharva of the waters, which is the Soma when it enters the waters. So you can see there is this through line, this connection between the Soma becoming the Gandharva in the right, and then also the radiant sun, Rigveda 9.86.29, same hymn. This Soma is invoked as the sun, actually, which is another paradox because Soma is usually the moon. But it's like when it enters the water, becoming Soma of the Gandharva, the Gandharva of the waters, it also gets identified with the sun somehow. And then what else was I going to say? So yeah, you can see that this is, you could call it entheogenic, you could call it whatever you like. The Soma was a real ritual, of course, with a certain substance that they would drink, and it embodied a power of inspiration, among other things. And so that Krishanu, as the guardian of the Soma, is also, he's there as sort of the last step to conveying that Soma to the seer, with that Soma, that Gandharva within the heart, as she describes it. Okay, so so that can describe an entheogenic, or it can describe a ritual process of drinking the Soma itself, is what I'm saying. So it can be a real substance that they're imbibing in that, especially since the Rig Veda is just steeped in that Soma rite. If Odin is called Bragi, foremost poet, imagine my shock when Puith means wisdom, chief of the underworld. Well, yeah, Pen Anuan means chief of the underworld. And his first reference is him leading a hunt. Right. Good points. So anyways, yeah, I think when you connect some of these things together, you can see how Puith is like this double of Aran in a similar way to the Gandharva and his connection to Soma. That would be my argument there. Sounds like maybe you drink the two in tandem. Krishanu looks like Krios. Interesting. Yeah. So this issue, I think these points are pretty, to me, these are well founded, that Puith in this role, sleeping in this bed, preserving the virginity for exactly a year and a day, it maps so closely to what we see of the Gandharva summit. And then you see Hermes himself giving the staff to Persephone in a similar role to adorn her bed. I think that that's a strong case for Puish being the Gandharva. But then from that point, things get very confusing, I think. And this is in the chapter of my book called the Greek lunar cycle. I go into the weeds a lot, and I think it's the most confusing chapter of my book by far. I'm sure if anyone's read my book, they would probably agree, because it seems like there are some conflations going on, and I was trying to make sense of this along the lines of how I just described. The Soma goes into the water and becomes the Gandharva of the waters, but then gets identified also with the sun in some capacity, who's Vivasvat. So you have these three kind of deities overlapping esoterically. And I kept getting lost on this question of why Puish seems to have overlaps with the Gandharva, but also with Vivasvat. So Vivasvat has a myth where he is married to Saranyu, and they both take the form of horses, and he then impregnates Saranyu in a sort of, I'm forgetting right now if there are different versions where one of them is an outright rape, or if it was just sort of sort of implied unwanted advance. I know there's a version involving the semen getting in the nostril, like the Saranyu breathing in the semen through her nostrils, and becoming impregnated. But you have this complex parallel then of Vivasvat and Saranyu, which scholars have connected to. It is Poseidon, Hippios, and Demeter. So that famous myth of Poseidon taking the form of a horse to chase Demeter and then raping her, and then of course Persephone being the daughter of Demeter and being sort of a continuation of Demeter. I think some of these things start to overlap, in a way that I just wanted to point to without getting too far into the weeds, because I was reading through some material, and I was reflecting on this and saying, like, it's just too like too many potential conflations, overlaps happening that are causing confusion on the issue of Puish, where I think we can say he is the Gandharva, and whether he is Vivasvat or not is kind of gets lost in the weeds. But then I found this another blog discussing this issue, and what this blog says is, citing Brian Jare Cuevas, says, quote, "The Brahmanic sources recount how Soma remained with the Gandharvas, and how the Gandharva Vivasvat, the Vedic father of Yama and Yami, had stolen the vital juice. However, in most stories, it is either Indra riding on an eagle who steals Soma, Rigveda 4.36, or an eagle who steals Soma and gives it to Indra, Rigveda 4.18. Elsewhere, Vivasvat is certainly said to be the father of the twins Yama and Yami, Rigveda 10.17 and 10.18. And elsewhere, Rigveda 10.10, where Yama's twin sister Yami is trying unsuccessfully to seduce him, Yama says, "The Gandharva and the maiden in the waters is our supreme origin. That is our relationship." So the important part of that is that Yama and Yami's parents are usually canonically Vivasvat and Saranyu. But here in this Rigvedic passage, they say, "The Gandharva and the maiden in the waters is our supreme origin." So then this blogger continues, "If we follow the implication, then Vivasvat was a Gandharva. On the other hand, Doniger, 1981, comments that Gandharva here is, quote, probably the sun born of the waters, but perhaps just any Gandharva. unquote. In fact, Vivasvat is usually a name for the sun, unquote. So point is, even Doniger and even this Cuevas scholar are noting that Vivasvat and Gandharva somehow confusingly become equated in the Rig Veda, whether as the parents of Yama and Yami, or when the Soma goes into the water, becoming the Gandharva of the waters, then taking on an identification with the sun, which is in the waters in other parts of the Rig Veda. Okay, so the sun is this glowing embryo in the waters in other parts. So then these conceptually become identified when the Soma goes in the waters. Okay, so this is just it's fascinating to me, even though I'm sure it's kind of it loses value to go too much into this, because I like to make things clear. I like comparisons that are very crisp and clear, but other people are seeing this overlap between the Gandharva and Vivasvat himself, and that could explain why Puish has motifs that can align with both, and that this Poseidon Hippios has motifs that potentially could kind of align with both, and it could explain some of this, what appears to be sort of a confusion or conflation, could come down to what is a deeper esoteric identity between Vivasvat and the Gandharva. Okay, so that's all I'll say on that. One reason I wanted to touch on that is that we also have in the Welsh material Eufith or Hafith, and Hafith is said theoretically by scholars to connect etymologically, linguistically with Oma of the Irish material. So Oma is who we should look at as the bard, the court bard of the gods. If we want to just look at the role of court bard, it would be Oma most likely, and god of eloquence, as we see Ogmios chaining his listeners with his tongue, being this god of eloquence, and also Oma guarding the being sort of a doorkeeper of the palace when Lu comes, in a similar way to how Bragi, for some reason, is this guardian, this doorman of the Aegir's feast when Loki comes. I'm not saying that Loki and Lu are parallel there, but it's just this role of this the one who sort of guards at the door. So if you take Oma, I also show how Oma marries Aidin, Etain, and but canonically, really, the main spouse of Aidin is Mither, who is Soma. So Mither is the Soma god paralleling Aran, but then elsewhere it says that Oma also marries Aidin, just like we said, Aran and then Puish. It's like this potential same sequence of the Soma god and then a Gandharva god marrying the same sort of sun goddess. And what's curious about that is that Oma linguistically parallels Eufith or Hethith, and Eufith is not Puish. So that's why I want to describe how there could be this sort of these two mythemes being conflated or esoterically overlapping with Vivasvat and Gandharva around Puish. It is Rhiannon's father instead who is Eufith. Eufith Fab. What was it? We have it listed here. Eufith Fab Dawn. And Eufith Fab Dawn supposedly is cognate to Ogmios, and is father instead of Rhiannon. So it does not match Puish. But I would like to argue that because of these sort of shifts and this esoteric overlap, they may both be in Gandharvic rules, and also there can be a multiplicity of Gandharvas. Is there any further parallels you'd like to touch on? Because as far as Oma goes, he's the god of eloquence. He is like the court bard. You can go into how he's, connected to the Oma tract. In the Oma tract, he is a god connected to eloquence and poetry. But it's kind of just that basic concept that makes him the Gandharva, the most likely Gandharva. And then pinning that down is that he marries Aideen, who is the spouse of Mither. That really puts him in this role that we saw where the Gandharva is the other spouse of that same spouse of the Soma god. But beyond that, there's not too much to go into other than gathering wood. This gathering firewood concept that Oma does is also something we see with Hermes and with the Gandharva. That I know that Alan and Woodard discuss this gathering of firewood in their article, but you'll have to look into that article to see that point. Yeah, was there any further comparisons we should make before we wrap things up?
I mean, I can bring up some of the things that I thought Josephus would have been able to talk about. I don't think he's going to be joining us at all.
Yeah.
First of all, I have seen the etymological argument for Hethith, or, I know I'm mispronouncing that, being cognate with Oma or Ogmios, and it seems at least stronger than simply theoretical. So that one's pretty. But in terms of Oma, Bragi, and all them, standing guard at doorways and allowing people through, that to me comes off as a psychopompic symbol. It's just another sort of a representation of their psychopompous nature. There were some Greek and Roman Gandharva parallels, or Gandharva adjacent related deities or classes of deities that I've discussed with Joseph before. And I was thinking of this, it would have been a great segue when you were talking about how Puig resembles around when he goes into Anwen, that the retinue of followers of Dionysus, the Silenoi, were led by Silenos, that large, fat drunkard man who rides a donkey, constantly drunk. He is the greatest of Dionysus' followers. Joseph and I discussed briefly a long time ago if they could be some kind of other remnant of a Gandharva retinue in the Hellenic tradition. Doesn't really go any further past that, but into the Roman pantheon, I remember he discusses Februos and also Mutinus Tutinus, who's also called Mutunus Tutunus. Mutinus Tutinus is related to a very similar marriage ritual to the Gandharva ritual. I can't go in depth to this because he's my memory of this is from my conversation with him. He's the one who knows the primary sources and the stuff. And then Februos is this deity of purification, which kind of reminded me, I was reminded of that when you were going through how the Gandharva preserves the virginity of the solar bride, passing from the lunar Soma husband to Agni. He's the god the month February is named after, and February in Roman and Anglo-Saxon calendars is related to a month of purification and cleaning. So beyond those parallels, I do want to get into what you've just put up here, which is my own thoughts on in Europe, we seem to have two main examples of a Gandharva. One is eloquent, and he either succeeds in being convincing or in lulling people or whatever in myth, or is just the god of eloquence, with being credited with inventing writing and being the foremost bard of the gods. And then you have one who fails in when he uses language in his myths. So Jason is another parallel that we didn't talk about that I thought so a while ago might be another Hellenic Gandharva. I thought he was very similar. I thought his Jason and Medea and their entire narrative together resembled Pwyll and Rhiannon quite a bit to me, where Rhiannon and Medea give Jason and Pwyll instructions on what to say, and they sort of fumble, or in Jason's case, breaks his promise to Medea and causes a bunch of misfortune. And Karuniak, I think you talked about him in your book, but you didn't. You don't mention him very heavily when you bring up Celtic Gandharva parallels. He does something very similar with Pwyll, where he accidentally bets that his wife Macha, who, like Rhiannon, would be an insular Celtic Epona goddess, that he could beat Conar's horses, that his wife Macha could beat Conar's horses in a race, and she was pregnant at the time. And so you have these two main Gandharva parallels, where one of them is eloquent and the other one fails and causes a lot of misfortune or harm, and in some cases curses, by failing to be eloquent enough, whether he makes a foolish promise or bet with King Conar, in Jason's case breaking his promise to Medea. Pwyll does something similar with Gual, and then I think Hermother failing to convince Hel to let Balder back into the world of the living is another example of that, if he is a secondary Gandharva example.
Interesting. And yeah, I haven't looked at Jason, but that is entirely possible. I think this is an important myth theme, what we see with Pwyll and the way he sees Rhiannon and that whole story. It's important. So it could be showing up there. I'll also say that we have with Visvavasu or Vishvavasu, there's actually a couple different figures, and one of them becomes cursed and turns into a demon, essentially. So let's see. He's causing problems. He becomes Kabanda. So, yeah. Kabanda was a Gandharva named Vishvavasu, aka Danu, who was cursed and made into an ugly carnivorous demon by a sage named Stulshira. In an encounter with Rama and Lakshmana, the brothers sever his arms and proceed to cremate his corpse. Upon his death, Kabanda resumes his Gandharva form and directs Rama to the Rishi Yamuka mountain, where the exiled monkey chief Sugriva is hiding. Anyways, they follow his advice and rescue Sita. And so it's interesting because, yeah, he becomes a demon and by being cursed. So he became arrogant due to his boon and attacked Indra. And then he further attacks some other figures. Drunk with the wine of youth and beauty, he would roam. He was arrogant. So I don't know if maybe there are these themes of sort of failed Gandharvas, is what I'm saying, who embody a cursed side, a failed side that could align with some of what you're saying. I'm not sure. But it also suggests this sort of ambivalent role where the Gandharva can be aligned with the demonic or the divine in different places, different types of Gandharvas. There's obviously if they're appearing multiply, some can be more demonically aligned and some can be less. Yeah. I also wonder about the Krishanu as the sort of the one trying to stop the retrieval of the soma, if that has anything to do with sort of stopping eloquence. You point out a possible ineloquent Gandharva, which I wonder if it has anything to do with the role of the Gandharva as also trying to stop that flow of eloquence. I'm not sure, or if that just kind of is that razor's edge of ambivalence where it can kind of go either way. We do see lots of times, a negative version of something. If Mitra embodies perfect truthfulness, then in a key myth, he will fail that particular role that is his own special power of truthfulness. He then becomes the embodiment of the failed perfect truthfulness in the Yudhishthira story with his chariot and with Tyr and the loss of his arm. He participates in a half truth and then becomes the embodiment, the emblem of that, the negative side of that virtue, so to speak, or that power. So it's entirely possible that something like that. You could see that it's a common mythic concept for this to happen.
Yeah, well, the Gandharva's nature as psychopomps, they exist in a liminal space. So them as guarding a doorway, they could represent both sides of that liminal space, especially in their overlap with the solar Rudra and the lunar Soma. I think there's also alchemic or esoteric images of Mercury meant to depict Hermes, where he's holding two keys, and that's meant to symbolize his psychopompous nature as a go-between, where like he's a guide to and from the afterlife or other world. So it makes a lot of sense that you would have both eloquent and ineloquent, or successful and failure Gandharvas.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Entirely possible. The last thing I wanted to get your guys' opinions on, and I wanted to ask Josephus about this because it touches on Roman material, but we were trying to distinguish between the Gandharva and the Pushan type, and the question is still out there whether Mercury, should he be more this Gandharva type? If he's based on Hermes is actually foundationally a Gandharva type. So does that mean Mercury is too? Or was the Roman original Mercury's a Pushan type that then was overlaid with Gandharva material, so that now what we have of Mercury is a combination or is even predominantly one or the other? It's hard to say. But then you have the question of Hermes Trismegistus, which I've been trying to make sense of, like the Egyptian Thoth or Tot. And this is kind of a tangent, but I'll just end with this question, which is Thoth, is he really a Hermes type? Because he's often equated with Hermes. Do we think that he is actually, if we get a clearer picture of Hermes as this Gandharva type, does that have any relevance to the Egyptian Thoth, or is that an incorrect interpretatio, so to speak? And then the other question is, could Thoth be sort of the Rudra type but seen through this lens of the Rudra as the higher Gandharva, by which I mean, like, when you look at the Rudra, you look at him through a certain epithet, which is one of his aspects, so to speak. It would be like saying Odin is the greatest Bragi. So you're looking at Odin through the lens of Bragi, of that role, which is the Gandharva role. But he has the epithet of Bragi. He is really the higher Bragi in that sense, arguably, esoterically. Is that what it means to say that Thoth is a Hermes type? Are you looking at what is really a Rudra type, but through the lens of the scribe / god of eloquence writing that Thoth is? Would that make any sense to see him that way? Because we have in the Egyptian mythology several other candidates for Rudra types, who make sense as Rudras, like Shu as the divider of earth and sky is in a comparable role. We have arguably the primordial serpent who wrestles with Atum, and I'm forgetting the name right now, but we've discussed before, could be a sort of higher Rudra principle. Even Ptah himself, this highest god, sometimes appears very similar to the very high concepts of a Rudra or Shiva type on the highest level of all. But yeah, there are other traditions where Thoth is the focused on God as sort of highest god, even in Egyptian, in certain branches of Egyptian mythology. So is it accurate, do you think, to say that Thoth is a Hermes type, and that we're seeing sort of the higher Rudra and Gandharvic types telescoped together in that way when Thoth is spoken of, and or is Thoth just not the same as the Gandharva type, maybe? So those are my final thoughts. Anyone in the comments have any insights on that? I'm looking for insights on this question. I'm looking for answers. So. But yeah, Soma is most likely a Phaedra. That's what it seems like most scholars think. But yeah, it may have been some recipe, a combination of things or some plant that we don't have, that they used up, that died out, whatever, so long ago. They were using it in mass quantities, and it grew up on mountainsides, apparently, whatever it was. So somehow the exact ingredients were lost, but many scholars think it was a Phaedra or something similar. Yeah, Thoth, yeah, tote. All right, well, hopefully all the questions were answered that we touched on. I do think the case for the Gandharva is clearest with Hermes. He has the most mythology, and it just paints a consistent picture. And then from there, you can kind of look at the other bards of the gods. And I do think it adds up. I do think it is a consistent god type that we find in the Celtic and Norse pantheons. And if Mercury isn't the Gandharva, then you kind of are missing a Gandharva in the Roman material, except for you mentioned the
Februus and
Februus. So are those full-blown deities?
Silenus and the Silenoi are Greek. They are followers of Dionysus. I believe Silenus is seen as, they're like lower deities, but I believe they are seen as deities.
Okay.
You're not necessarily left without Gandharvas. You have Februus and Mutinus Tutinus potentially, but yeah.
Right. Mutinus Tutinus. Is Mutinus Tutinus in the legendary, like Euhemerized history, or is it in?
No, I think he's a deity that has like recorded. Look, we have like statues and things to him. He's been syncretized, or sorry, in like Interpretatio Romana, been connected with Priapus because I think one of his imageries or something has an enlarged phallus, but he is related to a specific marriage ritual, if I remember correctly. It's not necessarily in legendary myth like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, then those are So it does leave open the possibility that Mercury was originally the Pushon. And what do you think? Was Mercury the Pushon or was Mercury the Gandharva?
It is honestly impossible to say for sure since we have no information on a pre-Hellenized Mercury. Everything we see about Mercury, except for perhaps unprovable like mental bias in Roman soldiers when they were equating Germanic and Gallic gods with theirs, when they were looking at gods and recognizing them as Mercury. All of the information we have on Mercury is he's just completely syncretized with Hermes. So
Exactly.
every time so it's kind of impossible to tell.
Yeah.
I think he could be. Yeah. I think I lean more towards Pushan because his name's related to mercantilism.
Yeah. And also when you look at the Gaulish equations like Mercury Whitticus, that is a Pushonic type that they're equating with. So you have that. But you do have the Hermes type, the Gandharva type, can be directly connected with mercantilism because eloquence was involved in trade and even,
Yeah, Gandharva and Pushan have probably more overlap than any other two gods, in my opinion.
And so that's kind of the issue that we're faced with. But hopefully people will look at this. I just want people to look at this issue more closely and to understand the Gandharva type on his own. And I think it creates a lot of clarity in the Hermes versus Pan issue. Even if there's a lot of complexity to the Gandharva type that can lead to other confusions. It leads to a lot of clarity, at least in the question of Hermes. So that's all I got to get running. And thanks for discussing with me. And we'll just talk next time. Hopefully we can talk to Josephus again sometime soon. It's too bad he couldn't make it. And thank you to everyone for commenting and for watching today. And please post any further questions in the comments. So, all right. Thanks, Arno. Thanks for chatting. And talk to you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. See you.
All right. See you.